Welcome back to my Commodore 64 Memories videos. This is where I look at old Commodore 64 software and some of the technical details behind them. Today we have Super Mario Bros. Released in 2019 by ZeroPaige on this Lemon 64 forum link here. So isn't this fantastic? This is a very accurate, kind of like a disassembly, reassembly conversion of the NES Mario version, so the Nintendo Entertainment System. So the NES version also uses a 6502 or very close variant of the 6502. I think the CPU on the NES is a bit faster than the CPU on the C64. However, the C64 has, I think it's, a little bit of extra, comparatively speaking, hardware trickery up its sleeves. But yeah, this version is really fantastic. The conversion of the sound effects as well is really good. I haven't played through the entire version of this game, but it seems to be really very accurate. And that's because of the way that this game was converted. It's not a conversion. It's more like a disassembly and reassembly, but then using the Commodore 64's graphics and sound capabilities to draw what the original NES code would expect, I think. That's what I gather from the README anyway. I mean, this version is incredibly accurate. So let's have a look at the intro of the cartridge in C64 Debug GUI, and we can immediately see that we have this really very, very large wibbly-wobbly sprite sheet. All of the red bounding boxes there indicate where the individual sprites are. And that's not really a surprise, right? I mean, we've got this really nice background in blue, a really nice outline drawing, and then the sprites over the top, smoothly scrolling over the top. Moving around. They're not really scrolling, right? But yeah, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sprites. High resolution sprites, not expanded, just side by side. And then there are little gaps in between the rows. So we've got 2 character rows for each sprite vertically, and then they're separated by what looks like maybe 2 or 3 or even 4, 3 or 4 pixels, I think. The red bounding boxes, of course, show where the sprites are. So let's get the screen into a good horizontal scroll position so we can debug how this scroll really works. Oh, I've just died. Well, let's try that again. But this time, let's try not dying. Okay, so let's scroll over. Yeah, this makes it even harder to play, doesn't it? Because the screen doesn't scroll in this debug mode. There we go. That'll do. So we can see that there's this left to right vertical disjoint between this row of this column of characters there. Let's use the targeting cursor, the raster targeting cursor here, to move along the cycles on the scan lines, and we should get to some stabilization code. Now this stabilization code should, in theory, stabilize the CPU clock cycles with respect to the cycles for the display, and make sure that the routine starts on a completely stable, deterministic cycle along the raster line schedule. So here we go. That's a bunch of no-ops, and then these no-ops then slide into this stabilization timing code here, which stabilizes for the last pixel wobble, and then we have some timing code which then precisely times the DEC D011 and INC D011. So you can see here with the sequencer state as that deck and ink happen, the sequencer state there goes from idle to display on this particular raster line. And what this means is that the VSP trick has been triggered. It's called a DMA delay sometimes as well. But basically it means, and I've covered this in the VSP video, it means that the VIC starts fetching character data at that particular cycle earlier, and that causes the whole screen to shift up to 39 characters. So that's the basis of the VSP scroll. I'll add a link to the description below for the VSP video where I go into that in a lot more detail. But there we go, we just validated that VSP is being used. So now I just want to check the double height Mario sprite. So let's pick up Mushroom. Mario has now grown into 2 sprites high. And we can see in the Vic debug view here that the first 2 sprites, Sprite 0 and Sprite 1, are used. There is a high resolution sprite overlay on the left there, and then a low resolution sprite underlay on the right. So the sprites are not vertically expanded or anything like that. But what happens here is that as I move the raster targeting cursor down, you can see that the sprite Y position is immediately updated, and then the sprite pointers are very quickly updated within the last 1 or 2 pixels of the bottom of the first pair of sprites. And then it flips over to the legs. Now you'll notice that actually if I change the colors there, you could see what colors were being used. So it's basically brown for the high resolution overlay, right? The mustache and the hair, and I think the clothes as well, right? But look, here we have, at the bottom of the sprite, we've got a duplicate of the bottom of the top part of Mario. So what this does is that it ensures that if the changing of the sprite pointers wobbles around for a couple of raster lines, it at least ensures that the bottom of the Mario sprite is correctly and consistently rendered. It basically avoids the gap between the 2 sprites. And it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, four rows of pixels there of duplicate data. So that means that there's kind of like a little timing there's a timing safety gap there. And then right down at the bottom, the sprite is actually changed to be completely transparent just below Mario's feet. And there's what, like 2 or 3, maybe 3 rows of blank pixel data underneath Mario's feet as well. So that gives enough wobble time, variation time, to allow the sprites to be switched off. So that's an interesting point there, is that the double height Mario only uses 2 sprites, and it stacks them vertically with that sprite frame trick. So let's have a look at this in ICU 64 now. Now we've verified that it's, yes, using a VSP for the scrolling trick in C64 Debug GUI. We can look at this ICU 64. And we can see what the code looks like when it's executing, I think. Because I have a feeling that we might find something rather interesting. In the intro portion of the screen, notice in the memory view that there's only a very small amount of blue code execution there. We have a whole bunch of sprites being used, of course, for the text overlay on this screen. We can see the sprite data quite clearly there, along with the Super Mario Bros. 64 logo. It looks like it took 7 years roughly for ZeroPaige to complete this port. I think it's very well done. I can certainly understand how it would have taken so long with part-time work. Anyway, so we're going to add a second SID. Now this is a really great feature of this game, is that if you have 2 SIDs, then you can increase the number of virtual or emulated sound channels, and it more closely sounds like a NES with 2 SIDs. So there we go. This should appear in stereo now. There we go. So now the music and the sound effects will be in stereo with that extra SID. That just helps with the fidelity of the music. So let's get the old memory view and the text screens up and everything else. So here we go, there's the graphics map view there showing the two text screens. With the VSP scroll, because it's wider than the screen, we need to have one screen shifted up with respect to the other ones so that when the scroll wraps around we can also shift to the other screen buffer. Of course you can see that the color data does not scroll because it doesn't need to because it's using that VSP scroll. But yeah, doesn't this sound rather marvellous? We've got stereo sound now because we've got two SID chips effectively. It's not that one that allows you to go down, is it? It's not that one either that allows you to go down. This is a really good accurate conversion, but that's because it's using the NES code. Pretty sure by reading the README file and the comment thread in Lemon, it was pretty obvious that it uses mostly NES code, either from the PAL or NTSC releases. No, that's not the -1 world jump point, is it? There's a little glitch to getting to a minus world, but it's not that one. Oops, the daisies. Not very good at this game. Not very much practice, obviously. It's not that pipe, is it? No. Anyway, let's complete the level. Still sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Because the NES CPU is a little bit faster, there is some slowdown. I suppose I could have run this in 128 mode and then use the turbo there, but there we go. Anyway, so there's the whole sprite sheet for the whole level, for the whole game. There is a little bit of dynamic sprite usage there, so when the mushroom came on, the mushroom was dynamic. There are a few other dynamic sprite frames there being updated as the animations progress. But yeah, fantastic little game, this one. Very well done on the porting effort, I think. Even with the slowdown issues, and that's to be expected. When I was doing a little search on the internet, I did find this disassembled and commented version of the NES version of Super Mario Brothers. Now I'm looking for shroom, like mushroom, right? Because one of the power-ups that you can collect is the mushroom, as we've seen already in this video. And when you collect the mushroom, Mario will get larger, turn into double height mode, but also, I think it's the flower, right? It gives you fireballs. So I'm just looking to see where the mushroom code for the pickup. Ah, there we go. Power up object handler, right? Handle power up collision. There we are. That's what I'm looking for. Handle power up collision routine. So it goes, if you've collected a shroom, a mushroom, or a flower power up, then do stuff. So it checks the player status and then it stores 2 into the player status. Okay, so let's see what memory address is the player status, and that's at 756 in hex. I have a crazy idea. Let's use the machine code monitor to update memory location 756 with 1. And let's see what that does. No, hold on a second. Let's change it to be 2. Whoops, there we go. There we go. Mario is now changed to be white. And Mario can fire the fireballs, but look, he's mostly short rather than tall. Okay. So there might be, there we go. Player size 754 is the player size, I'm pretty much guessing. So let's change both of those memory locations, 754 and 756. Let's turn on that SID again, the second SID, because it sounds much better, right? But yeah, let's then go into the game and change 754 in hex and 756 in hex and see if we can get a double height fireball shooting Mario or something like that. Now, what does this tell us? Well, that disassembly was from the NES version. So, yeah, that's right. 754 is 1 currently, so we should probably make 754 0, right? And there we go, double height. So anyway, yes, this disassembly, or that disassembly, was from the NES version, which tells us that the memory addresses, at least for Mario's height and the Mario state, those memory addresses are consistent with the NES version. Interesting, right? So, I mean, you know, according to the README and the lemon thread discussion on this, the conversion basically disassembled the NES versions and then altered some code to make it C64 compliant, and then reassembled it again and moved things around. But evidently, the variables, or at least those two variables for the player size and the player state, are consistent. So let's have a think, right? If those two variable locations are consistent with what was in the NES version, maybe we can find some code on this C64 version which is also consistent with what's on the NES version, right? So we already know the memory location for the player state and size, so let's use those. So in the machine code monitor, let's use the H command, which is hunt, and we look for 8D, 5, 6, and 7, which is store accumulator absolute memory address 756 in hex. We've got rather a few between 0 and FFFF all the way up at the end of memory. So let's narrow this down to a particular piece of code. So let's look for store A into player status in the disassembly. And what we'll do is that we will look for a good piece of code to search for. So there we go. There's a load accumulator with hash $02. So put 2 into the accumulator. So load accumulator immediate is A9. And then we look for A2, and then 8D567 shows this piece of code there. So that piece of code looks very similar to the piece of code that we were just looking at in the disassembly, right? So let's put these windows side by side a little bit more so it's easier to see, I think. So there's the machine code monitor disassembly view. There is the disassembly from the NES version on the right. So there we go, load, LDA hash $02, LDA hash $02 at line 11260 there. And then immediately following it is the store A with 756 in hex, which is store A with player status on the right. So the start of this routine, look, it loads accumulator with the player status. Let's add a label for the player status just to make this disassembly easier to read, right? I never remember which way around the add label command works. No, it's the other way around. There we go. Hex memory location first, please, and then the label name on the right. Makes sense, right? Anyway, so let's disassemble that again. There we go. Load accumulator with player status. And then we have a branch on equal to somewhere nearby to upper. And of course, it's going to be a memory address on the disassembly because the disassembly doesn't know about that up to super label. And then we have a load X with object offset. Object offset is, I'm guessing, is going to be 08 in hex, which is way down near the beginning of ZeroPaige. Yep, there we go. So we'll add the label for object offset as well. I think that'll make it a little bit more readable. So there's no JSR. After this store accumulator player status, there's no JSR. And the JSR is to get player colors, but on the Commodore 64 version, that doesn't really make sense. Because the player colors come from the sprites, and there's probably some sprite handling, which is a lot different to the NES version, right? Anyway, let's add the label for the hex memory location 8, which is the same as decimal 8, obviously. But anyway, there we go. So that makes the code on the left from the disassembly of the Commodore 64 version look a lot similar to the version of the disassembly from the NES version on the right. So I think we can safely say, conclusively, that the notes and the thread in Lemon were correct, obviously, that is a disassembly of the NES version and then tweaked and then reassembled for the Commodore 64. So that's why this conversion of Super Mario Brothers is so precise and exact compared to the NES version, is that it uses the NES code effectively, with a lot of tweaks and a lot of reassembly and stuff like that. But yeah, basically it's the NES code. So yeah, fantastic conversion of Super Mario Bros. 64. Thank you very much to my YouTube commenter for suggesting that I have a look at this version. It's very interesting to look at this more contemporary piece of Commodore 64 games history. So yes, if you like these kind of technical deep dive videos, then please do consider liking or subscribing to this channel, or sending me a super thanks. They are always very much appreciated. Take care, have a great day, evening or night, wherever you are.